excited to have you here, Melissa, and welcome.
Oh, hi, Ginny. I'm so excited to be here.
So here we are. I got to watch you unbox your baby. How does it feel?
It feels amazing. It feels surreal and yet not real. Actually, I was at a friend's house the other day, and she had the book on her table, and she had the back of it. So, which you have a beautiful, just a generous, amazing quote on the back there.
Yes.
And that's kind of, and then it hit me. It was like, holy, that's a real book. And for some reason, it was this that made me think that or realize
Isn't that funny?
So it comes in waves, I think.
You know what I really love about it, which it has nothing to do with Crisis, but I love the white space. I love the color that you've used, and like the way that you've used the color throughout the book is phenomenal. It's just designed really well. I love that.
Thank you. That was important to me. I put my publishers through hell. I flew down to DC twice with stacks of books.
They were like, oh,
this, feel this. Really, because I wanted it to be the opposite of a regular, every other crisis management book. I love the subject. It's my passion, and they put me to sleep. So this one could not do that. And that meant everything from the texture to scrolling through it to reading it, the experience. So thank you for saying that.
Well, hopefully it helps you reach all your goals, which I know are lofty. So.
Thank you.
It's very pretty. And there's also, where is it? Oh, no, I'm not going to put my hand on it, but my finger on it. But there's a great chart on, there it is, the Crisis Ready flow chart. Ta-da! Which I also love.
Thank you.
It's so cool. It's born.
Cool. It was born.
It's awesome. I remember that feeling so well. I loved it. Love it, love it, love it, love it.
And
all right,
so long, and then you release it, you know?
Right.
So.
And then you just kind of hold your breath, and you're like, what are
please. Yeah, exactly.
My favorite 1-star review on Spin Sucks was that the font was too small. And I was like,
hey, if that's the only thing I can say, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, font's too small. So, there you go. Doesn't matter how much time or effort you put into it.
Nope.
Somebody will find something.
Allow you to enlarge the font. Issue managed.
Actually, if you have it on Kindle, you can actually do that.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely.
All right, so now that we've talked about how pretty it is, what can people expect when they read it, and how will it help them in a crisis?
So Crisis Ready is about not having crises because you're crisis ready. So the book, it started with people saying to me, asking me, friends, colleagues asking me, so what do your clients do in crisis? And knock on wood, I would say my clients don't have crises. They're crisis ready. I help them build brand invincibility. That's what I do. This book is every single thing that I have in my head. I gave it all. So it is the roadmap to brand invincibility. And it's practical. It's fun. It's designed for the entire team. It's got games and just because that's how I like to learn. So that is what you gain from the book. I hope if I did my job right.
Well, I think that's really important because, we talk about how it used to be if you had a crisis, and it was rare that you had to hire a crisis firm because it happened so rarely. But today, I mean, it's not it's not if, it's when today.
Well, the reality is that crises might be few and far between, fortunately, but issue management, that's every day. And in this day and age, issues go viral very easily.
Yes, they do.
And it used to be that smart organizations would be ready by having a plan on a shelf, and that would give leadership solace knowing that if a crisis were to strike, they could reach for the plan, follow it, and guide it.
Right.
Yes. But today, the reality is that by the time you reach for that plan, you're already miles behind. You're already playing catch up. Stakeholder demands start at minute 0 or minute 0.1. So being crisis ready means that your entire team knows how to identify a rising risk, how to assess its material impact on the brand, and how to respond in a way that doesn't just manage the incident, but actually manages it in a way that increases stakeholder trust and credibility and goodwill in the organization and the brand. That's what being crisis ready is. And that's saying that that plan is there if you need it as a comfort blanket, but the team instinctively, intuitively knows what to do, the entire team.
One of the things I think is really important in that is role playing and making sure that you're ready, and how, like, talk about a little bit about that, because I think to your point, you create the plan and you stick up on a shelf and that's it. So how important is, especially for like a social media manager, role playing and being prepared for certain things so that they can respond without emotion in the moment?
Yeah, it's important enough for it to be an entire chapter in my book.
It's like I read it.
So simulations, and it's more than just tabletops today. So again, it used to be, the status quo was you'd sit down with leadership, somebody would facilitate and ask questions, and you would theoretically think through what you would do. Whereas today, with technology and with the right tools and the right teams, the right professionals, you can actually simulate crises. So it's not just about what we would do, it's about get up and go do and test the plan and hone your skills as a collective, individually, department to department, and get that response back in real time. So simulating, for example, social media, and then as the simulator, like as the conductor of the exercise, you get to actually play with, are they responding well? Are they responding poorly? Up the ante, lessen the pressure and get that real-time feedback that is very, very real, because it's professionals who know what they're doing, who are conducting these simulations. So, it's even the best trained clients or organizations, they still gain every year. Those are the ones that do it every year. They still gain every year. And the things that we gain are things like, the room is too small, and that inhibited our ability to.
Interesting.
And I've seen it all. And like, you can't put your finger on that. You can't determine that. You can't identify that until you're in the moment. And I always say that you never want to experience a crisis, but in a crisis, you hope your team has experience.
Right.
This gives you that experience in a safe and controlled environment. And they're wonderful, wonderful just exercises and team building scenarios and stuff like that. So
I think one of the things it does too is it takes that emotion out of it, because you're in the moment of it and you can't help yourself. You get emotional and you get defensive.
Absolutely. The more experience you have, not just that, but that's also goes to, understanding the difference between an issue and a crisis, and understanding, for example, that just because an issue goes viral does not mean it's a crisis.
Right.
Really intuitively having a team that understands that and can understand and detect or assess the emotional relatability of a situation to foresee if it's going to go viral, or all of these different elements, knowing that ahead of time allows you to be cool and collected in the moment as much as possible. We are still human, but we want to give our teams the biggest chance at being that.
I think one of the best examples of late of an issue versus a crisis is what happened with Crockpot.
Oh, yes. I love that. I open my keynotes now with that. I love it.
Do you?
Yes.
It's like, all right, people, fictional character, television. Let's not freak out.
Yeah, generic slow cooker, not even a crock
right, not even a crock pot.
I love it. I love it. It was, and it shows us, it's actually the next print run of my book. That's going to be the opening story. I'm changing that train story for that one, just because it's unfathomable. It's unpredictable. And yet it actually happened.
Yes.
So
talk about that. Like, what did you, of course I watched the whole thing go down I'm just in awe. What do you think they did really well?
So to me, Crockpot was crisis ready for so many reasons. So firstly, they detected it right from the start. They saw it happen. So they were listening, right? So detection is you have to detect it right away if you're going to get ahead of it. They weren't even on Twitter, as you know.
Right.
So being savvy enough to understand the emotional relatability, it would have, let's picture, a lesser crisis ready or a non-crisis ready company. They could have looked at it and said, hello, this is irrational. This is ridiculous. It didn't happen. It's never happened in the history of Crockpot. It could never happen. We're designed for it not to happen. These people are irrational. We're just going to let it die down. It's going to go away. That could have been a mindset, and it would have been many organizations' mindset because of that irrational factor. Instead, they understood that it was emotionally relatable. So if we put ourselves into the context of why it happened in the first place, that 5-minute segment on This Is Us was, I don't watch that show, and I watched the 5-minute segment clearly, and it drew me in. I mean, it was beautifully crafted as a story. It was emotionally compelling. And in that emotion, people then sitting there, so millions of people watching the show, sitting there went, oh my goodness, I have a crock pot. My family's going to die.
Right. It's going to catch on fire in my right.
Exactly. So we took that emotional, compelling story and then added the relatability factor, so bringing it to us, and knowing that when you share it, other people are relating to it too, which is when something starts to get shared and go viral. Mm-hmm. That was what was real. Whether irrational or not, that was extremely, extremely real. And because of that, Crockpot needed to answer, because they would have lost credibility, they would have lost trust, they would have lost market cap, they would have lost all of it had they not responded. So they were savvy enough to know to respond and to jump on Twitter, because that's where the conversation was primarily being had.
Right.
And then they were savvy enough to respond with emotional intelligence. So you can never trump emotion with logic. And if they would have come out and said, guys, you're being ridiculous, this has never happened, and here's the stats and the facts to prove that, nobody would have listened. Instead, what they did was say, they validated emotion. They said, my goodness, we're devastated too. We can't believe this happened. Our hearts are broken with you. So they validated that emotion, and then they came in with the facts and the reality of, we care, this could never happen to you because our machines are designed, and here's more information on that. It was the way that they responded and their savviness and intuition in that emotional intelligence and the speed of that response that enabled them to take an issue that was quickly escalating and could have been crisis level,
right, and
de-escalate that down and actually use it as a way to build and strengthen those relationships and those ties with their decades old of customers. I mean, this is a home brand. We all have one in our homes, and our grandparents had ones in their homes.
Yes.
You know? So,
and one of the things, just from a pure PR perspective, I thought they did really well is get This Is Us on their side. And then they got the free Super Bowl ad. Like, they got all of this stuff from an earned perspective that they never in a million years would have gotten. You can't pay for that kind of stuff. It was phenomenal.
Yeah, it really was. And I love it, just because it's so, when I paint it on stage, I don't say it's Crockpot. And I just say, imagine. And I paint this crazy, wild scenario that people tell me later, they're like, we had no idea where you were going with it. We didn't know if we should be scared or if we should laugh at you. And then I make it go with, this actually happened. And what would you do? Like, is your team ready for this?
Yeah.
So
I think when you're getting ready for a crisis, you try to think through every scenario that could possibly happen. And a fictional character dying because of your product is now going to be in every single crisis plan.
And it shouldn't be, because it's not necessarily, relatable to every organization. It is
right
to understand or to identify the most likely high impact scenarios. And if you are crisis ready for those, so say you have 8 and you're crisis ready for those 8, when a 9th one happens, such as This Is Us and Crockpot, your team is completely ready because you've done the work to be ready for the 8.
Right. I love it. All right. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Facebook and the Cambridge Analytica issue.
Yes. What a missed opportunity. That's how I see it.
Do you?
I see it as, this is a 4-year-long issue that went mismanaged, as a result led to a missed opportunity. And it was, it was taking a situation, basically Facebook, Google, Snapchat, Twitter, all of these tech companies, They have built their business off of, and knowingly, off of the ignorance of the general public and lawmakers. We don't, as a community, as a society, we don't understand, or we don't take the time to understand what is happening with our data, right? Why are these platforms free? So they have opportunistically built these billion-dollar corporations off of the ignorance of the general public and lawmakers. This was a high-risk scenario. It's inevitable that people are going to wake up in some capacity someday. And the fact that I see it two ways. I see that, firstly, sure, Facebook, 4 years ago sent off the cease and desist to Cambridge Analytica or to whomever it was, but they didn't follow up. And that was their right and their responsibility to. They put it to bed knowing that it was always there. So it was a mismanaged issue that blew up in their face. So it could have been prevented. When it was happening, I said they're in crisis management mode because they weren't crisis ready. Had they been crisis ready, they would have put it to bed 4 years ago or 2 years ago. Maybe 4 years ago, times weren't as advanced, but as you have to being them as an organization, building your business off of this, you have to identify that as a high-risk scenario.
Absolutely, yes.
People are going to wake up somehow. And it could have been Google, just as it could have been Facebook. It could have been, but all of these organizations should have known and realized that this was going to happen. And by knowing that it was going to happen, one, they could have put the issue, manage the issues, whatever. And we're looking at Facebook, but I'm sure that there's tons of other
absolutely
that could have been, whether it could have been a different scenario with Facebook, it could have been a different scenario with Google, it could have been, so all of these mismanaged issues that were lingering and were festering that went mismanaged. And then look at what all of them are doing now. All of them are doing now reactively. Had one of them, and let's say Facebook, had Facebook identified this as a high-risk scenario, managed their issues appropriately, and then said, because the way that my brain works is I see risk, I see how to mitigate risk, and then I see opportunity in the mitigation. Mm-hmm. That's the way that my brain works just as a human being. That's like the way that I'm wired. If they would have mitigated the risk and then taken that as an opportunity. So imagine instead of now playing catch up and reactively responding to all of this, if they would have positioned themselves a year ago as knowing that the public is ignorant on the subject, it's going to blow up in our face eventually. How can we mitigate the risk of that happening by putting the issues to bed, but also finding opportunities to position ourselves as leaders so that it doesn't actually happen and the business model doesn't get disturbed or disrupted as a result. So for example, just a very high level example, what they're doing now reactively, easily could have done proactively.
Absolutely.
And positioned it as we know that you're not aware, so we're going to help you be, and we want to be transparent and open, which is what they claim to do all the time. That's what the brand is, right?
Yes.
We are transparent and they weren't. And when Zuckerberg wrote or said, "I'm sorry we didn't do more at the time," yeah, of course you're sorry.
Yeah, I bet you are.
So why didn't you do more at the time? And that goes to being crisis ready. That would have been crisis ready. And that crisis wouldn't have happened because they would have been crisis ready.
Do you think that the whole testimony before Congress and all of that, all of that leading up to his testimony would not have happened because if they had been ready?
It certainly wouldn't have come out the way that it did.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. And it certainly, I mean, to go to your point, showed a lot of ignorance that is out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. But they know this. These companies know this. And
absolutely.
They profit from it. It's their opportunity. And that's fine. But know that it's going to blow up in your face. So see that as a high-risk scenario, mitigate it, and then position yourself as a leader to get ahead of it ahead of time. So if it blows up in Google's face, Facebook gets to still be that
right.
leader.
Yep.
Or vice versa.
All right, one more I want to talk about, and that's Michigan State, and not the whole Larry Nassar thing in general, but it came out about a month ago that they had hired a PR firm to do social media monitoring, and they paid them $500,000 in 1 month to do social media monitoring of journalists and of the victims to figure out, what they're saying and what sentiment and all of that is. And I've gone back and forth on it, and I haven't written a blog post about it yet because in my brain it feels really unethical. But I can't decide if that's because of the situation, or if it's because the attorneys should have hired the PR firm to do this so that it was kept under client privilege. So I'm trying to decide like how I feel about it. So I'd love your thoughts on it.
So let me ask you this. Is it the money? Is it the amount, the $500,000 in a month?
I don't think so because, I come from a big agency, so I know how easy it is to spend that kind of money, how super easy it is. I can't decide if it's because the amount that was spent to monitor the victims when, he had already been indicted and sentenced. So it's not like it was happening during the trial. That bothers me. And I think the other thing that bothers me is it was all released. And as a PR firm or a crisis firm, you should know that if you're doing work for a public organization, all of that stuff is going to come out. So they became the story, which you shouldn't have happened. So I think that bothers me as well.
I can see that. I think what bothers me is the cultural crisis that Michigan State proved to have, which led to all of this in the first place, or at least led to the escalation in the amount of victims and the number of victims and over such a disgusting, insane period of time.
Yes.
So that bothers me. And then what they did, their ineffective response, their just the entire response that they proved, they had a cultural crisis. I mean, they were wrong every single step in the way, from the situation happening to the way they responded or didn't respond, and just on so many different levels. This to me ties into that. So they were monitoring, but were they monitoring for the right reasons? Not in my opinion.
Yes. Thank you for articulating that. I think that's what it is.
And you're right. It should have been done under client, attorney-client privilege, but most law firms are not savvy enough in terms of the reality today in crisis management, and that it's not just, and how both play in together. So for example, one of my first objectives when I work with a new client is I sit down with head of legal. That's what I know that's going to be where my pushback is going to be. And sometimes it's compliance and sometimes it's legal, and depending on the organization, sometimes it's both. But it's one of my first objectives, because once they understand that, like them, I'm in it for the better interest of my client, as they are, then and I help educate them on the full scope of liability and how that impacts, how this, for example, how many law firms would have said that's social media monitoring? That has nothing to do with that. Why would that matter? Why would you put money to any of these questions? So when they understand that, then they become my best allies, and we do amazing work together. But that is an obstacle, and it's an obstacle that needs to be overcome way before a crisis or a viral crisis. Yes. So there's a lot. I understand the gaps. Right from the sense of, MSU just being that, having a horrible culture, and that being the crisis period in terms of when it happened and how it was managed. And then straight through to Weber Shandwick, which is the PR agency, if I'm not mistaken.
You're correct.
The monitoring. They did their job, and they probably didn't get buy-in, and it's probably very easy for them to have missed the fact that this was a risk and not look at full scope of how this can be perceived and how it would reflect on their client. And then straight through to the attorney is probably not even thinking that this fell into their category. So there's a lot of problems full circle, but I see those problems all the time.
Yeah. And I think you're right when you said were they monitoring for the right reasons? And I agree with you. I don't think they were.
No. And if they were, they would have been doing it beforehand, and they would have managed it properly. And I say managed it properly, but I mean put the victims first, changed what they needed to change structurally as governance internally, as policy procedures internally, like all of that, all of the
Yes.
actions and communications that needed to take place that
Yes.
didn't.
Oh, you think they would have learned from Penn State, man?
That's the troubling thing, but that also goes to the societal issue right now. So if you look at like Starbucks and Tony Robbins,
Right.
so I had clients that say, oh, that's social media that does that. And that's why I despise the term social media crisis. Social media is a catalyst. It's a communications platform.
Yes.
Our societal trends right now, where we are as collectively, whether it's the Me Too movement and empowerment of women, straight through to not standing for racial discrimination anymore. These are societal crises that as a society, we've decided that enough is enough and we're not going to stand for it anymore. Organizations are missing that as now a new high-risk scenario. And Starbucks paid the repercussions for that, and Tony Robbins paid the repercussions for that. And that's ignorance. And that's like Facebook not identifying a high-risk scenario. That's two other examples of something that's rising and trending now within and changing culturally within our society. And so I can talk about this stuff forever, but it's
interesting though, the two examples you use with Tony Robbins and Starbucks, they both handled it or reacted completely differently.
Yes.
Which I think is fascinating as well. I think Starbucks, I mean, to your point, should have been ready for something like that, and they weren't, but they've handled it appropriately, reactively.
And it's hard to be ready for, I mean, if you think about it, how many times a day around North America, Canada and the US only, in not just in Starbucks, but in coffee shops, in outlets, in restaurants, in retail, locations, how many times has this happened in a day? It just happened that this one got caught on camera and went viral.
Right.
And it's really difficult to control
people.
Oh, yeah. And Starbucks would have the best policies and the best values and one bad apple in one of their locations.
Right.
But that is a risk.
Yep.
And there needs to be policies and procedures in place to prevent it as much as possible. It's to prevent the preventable, let's say. And those then can be leveraged as look at what we do and that's what they're doing now when they're closing down all the stores and all that. Right. That's what they're doing now. However, the risk with that is that they need to, I'm not a part of that training, but that training needs to be full scope on the full type of scenarios that we're looking at, like these high risk scenarios. Because if something were to happen that is not the exact same thing, but falls into the same category, that training is going to be held against them. Like that's going to become part of their risk.
Yes.
So they need to be looking at the full scope of that. So there's strategies and procedures that need to be put in place when looking at these, identifying first the high risk scenarios and then putting things to prevent the preventable and then to manage the unpreventable or be prepared for the unpreventable. You need to look at all of these full scopes, whether it's legal, whether it's, your PR firm and monitoring. And I find that, and what's frustrating to me is that crisis preparedness has always been so siloed. And that is not crisis ready. Crisis management is about people and it's entire organization wide. So it needs to be looked at, and the scope and breadth of it and the impact of an incident on an organization is extremely wide. So it can't be siloed anymore.
No. So it sounds like people need to read your whole book. But if you were to recommend they take only one thing away from it, what would it be?
If I were to recommend that they took only one thing, it would be to be crisis ready.
Build an invincible brand.
Yeah. It would be that to wake up the organization. And even the most awake organization. So I have one client that's one of my favorite clients. I've been working with them for 3 or 4 years now. And we go through trainings every year. I built out their entire crisis ready program with them over the course of the last few years. And yet they're still buying, they just bought a few dozen books for their board members, for all of their C-suite who are accountable but not responsible for the actual actions. So I'm training the teams, so it would be to spread. So my point is to say that this is a crisis ready organization that understands that there's still more awareness that needs to be had. So it doesn't matter how crisis ready you are, it would be to bring the consciousness and the alert make the team, the entire team, the board, everybody alert to the realities of today and start thinking through. And education is always the first step to change.
Yes. Yep.
So continue that education no matter where you fall on the spectrum of crisis readiness. I think that would be my biggest wish.
And I really like your first objective is to get on the side of legal or compliance, because that's true. They will always be your biggest obstacle, always. So that I think,
or your best ally.
Yeah. If you can get them on your side, boy, that's huge.
Yeah, and it's in the interest of the client, and
absolutely,
you can them knowing that together, right? So working together.
All right, now it's time for our speed round.
Okay.
The point is for you to answer with the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, I'm ready.
What is your favorite blog?
Oh, damn it! Well, you know what? And I'm not. I love Spin Sucks blog. I think.
Oh, come on! Choose a different one.
Choose a different one. Oh, I'm not reading. I read like media outlets for the most part.
All right.
So
what's your favorite?
It's I like BBC, I like CNN, I like anything that I feel is giving me just like facts to educate myself.
No fake news. No fake news for you, huh?
No fake news. No.
What's your favorite podcast?
I haven't really been listening to podcasts for like a year now. I've been on them, but I haven't been listening to them just because I've been consumed with being on them. Getting my message out.
You're launching a book, like I get it.
Yeah. So yeah.
All right, that's fair. Which book changed your life?
Ooh, which book changed my life? Oh my goodness, so many books have changed my life. If I go back, way back, so really changed my life, The Now Revolution by Jay Baer is one of the things that triggered my career.
No kidding. How?
Yeah. There's a chapter that talks about risk way back when in social media. And it was right at the time when I had a light bulb moment of why is nobody talking about the risk? Because my mind sees risk. I read that book, I read that chapter, and I knew that I was onto something. And I pursued it.
Good for you. That's awesome. I'm changing this next question to red wine or champagne.
Ooh. Okay, so if it's red wine or champagne, it's going to be champagne. But if it's champagne or white, I will always choose like a really nice Merceau over a champagne.
See, I added that because I know you. Where was your last vacation?
Real vacation?
Real vacation.
Sailing in the Exumas like 4 years ago.
Oh, 4 years ago.
I know I'm due. I'm so
you are due.
Yeah.
This book, get all your book stuff done and then go.
And go. Yes. Agreed.
What's your favorite snack?
Cereal.
I love how you're like guilty about it. There's nothing wrong with that.
I can't buy cereal because I go through it way too. It's my guilty pleasure.
That's hilarious. What's the best meal you've ever had?
I love food too much to ever have just one meal. I've been so blessed with the meals that I've had around the world, and like they're all so good. I'd say that it's people, right? It's the connection and the time spent with people that makes the meal.
Yeah. I agree with that because you could have really good food, and yes, I agree with that. The company could be terrible.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It ruins the food.
It totally does. I agree. I agree. What was my next one? What's your guilty pleasure?
Cereal.
I'm gonna send you a case of cereal.
and I'm gonna open it and go like, no,
don't do this to me.
It's gonna be gone in a weekend. Oh, that's awful.
When you wrote your book, did you do laptop or did you do pen and paper?
Ooh, good question. Laptop from around the world. Like I have pictures of me on planes and just everywhere writing the book. Yeah.
I know. You want to come and play.
I'm laughing. So she's like, you're not working. You're having fun. I can come join in.
What's your latest binge?
I don't binge. I haven't binged since my divorce, so in almost a year.
Look at you.
Except work. I binge work.
Yeah. People ask me that all the time. I'm like, the bike? I don't know. I don't really binge either.
Yeah. No.
So what's next?
Book, getting the message out, helping organizations, speaking, keynote speaking. That's like I love that because that's, again, getting the message out and helping to inspire change. That's what's next.
Where are you headed next?
Reno next week.
Oh, wow. Well, now that's exciting.
Yeah, Reno. And the hilarious thing is it's so far away. At 9:30 a.m., my work is done. And I'm like,
wow.
Well, it's keynote, right? So you get on stage, you get off stage, and you're done.
And you're done.
And this one actually leaves. It's a breakfast thing. So it's like a networking breakfast thing. So they're not even around. I can't even stay all day to chat and help.
Wow.
But I love it. So I'm excited.
Enjoy Reno.
Thank you.
It's a fabulous town.
I've never been.
Oh, well. If you drive a little bit to Tahoe, that's different, but.
Yeah? Huh. Or a flight over to Vegas, but.
Or over to Vegas, yeah. You could do that too. But you've been to Vegas, right?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you've never been to Vegas? Oh, well, you should do that.
I'm contemplating it.
Talk about food. Holy cow. I don't go for anything else but the food.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I'm not a gambling person.
Yeah. Food and shoes. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. It's always good to see you. I told Martin, thank you for introducing us 100 years ago because.
Was it Martin or Deirdre?
It was Martin.
It was Martin.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. I asked him on Friday and he was like, yeah, it was me. I'm taking credit for that. I was like, okay, all right. Yeah, it was. And then I think Deirdre backed him up, but yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about it before the call and I was thinking it was Deirdre, but it's very possible it was Martin.
I think it was Martin.
Yeah. Very cool.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's always good to see you.
Likewise.